Forget what you learned in school about pre-colonial Philippines. Lingid sa kalaman ng marami, may isang digmaan. May isang digmaan sa pagitan ng dalawang kaharian. A forgotten war between two kingdoms, between Brunei and Luzon. But it didn't end in a conquest. It ended in a wedding. Sa isang kasalan. A wedding that turned rivals into family. And a love match that reshaped Southeast Asia for centuries. To this very day. Mabuhay! Earn tumampangan, luwid kayo! And salam to our Muslim friends and family. So it is Valentine's Day, araw ng mga puso. Kaya naman, let's talk about love. Love and politics. Specifically, the legendary love stories that shaped Southeast Asian history for centuries. Love stories whose real-life legacy continues to this very day. This is actually one of my most requested topics to revisit and to expand on. So today, we're looking into the forgotten royal intermarriages that connected many kingdoms. From Luzon to Brunei, Sulu and beyond. We're talking love stories, political alliances, and the bloody conflict that nearly tore them apart. If you go to Brunei today, you'll hear about a legend, a legendary love story that rivals any fairy tale. In fact, they still sing about it. They still perform plays about it. They still teach it in schools. Children learn about it. An epic love story that starts with a dream in the middle of the sea, but sadly ended in a tragedy, a tragic death. The legend goes like this. There was once a young sultan named Bolkiah, but across Southeast Asia, he was known by another name, Nakhoda Ragam, the singing captain, a happy king who loved to sail and sing across the open seas. Now one night, he had a dream, a beautiful princess he had never seen before, and for many days, he couldn't get her out of his head. Then one day, while sailing in the middle of the sea, mysterious bubbles began rising from the water. White shining bubbles rising above the sea, shining, shimmering and splendid. It kept growing and growing, and it kept getting closer and closer. Everyone on the ship was terrified, but Nakhoda Ragam remained calm. He watched closely, curious as the bubbles grew closer and closer and closer. The bubbles, or the sea foam, are now surrounding their ship. And then, a sudden explosion occurred. And while everybody else was hiding in fear, the young sultan saw a beautiful princess emerge. Rising from the sea foam was the princess from his dreams. Her name was Putri, Laila Menchanai. They fell in love instantly. In fact, they couldn't even wait to return to land. They got married on the ship in the middle of the sea. They were so in love with each other that every night, under the brilliant moonlight, the blooming couple would happily sing together, happily singing as they sailed back to Brunei. But tragedy was waiting. One evening, the sultan found his wife sewing with a golden needle. Nakhoda Ragam loved what he saw, and he was excited to approach his beloved wife. But Putri Laila Menchanai stopped him. She told him not to get closer. She warned him that the magical golden needle was extremely dangerous. But the love-struck sultan didn't care. He shrugged it off and thought that his wife was just joking. Nakhoda Ragam did not mind the mysterious needle. He approached his beautiful wife and eventually fell asleep on her lap. But then an accident happened. The young sultan was spoke by the magical needle, and sadly, he never woke up. He passed away on her lap. Putri Laila Menchanai was devastated. She felt guilty for causing the death of the love of her life, the beloved Sultan of Brunei. She didn't know what to do. She was grieving. She was afraid, terrified that the people would blame her for killing the beloved king. And so, she locked herself in the room, laying beside her beloved but lifeless Sultan. And in the end, she took her own life. Some say she poked herself with the same golden needle, while others say that she used the Sultan's own golden kris to stab herself. Nevertheless, she took her own life to reunite with her beloved in the afterlife, to join him in eternal paradise. They were buried side by side in Brunei. Their tombs still stand today, and their eternal love is still passed down and sung across Southeast Asia. So that is the legend. An epic love story that sadly ended in tragedy, just like Romeo and Juliet. Except that Romeo and Juliet is fictional, katang-isip lamang. And this couple from this legend are very much real. In fact, they didn't die at sea. And the true story is even way better. So, sino nga ba sila? In reality, Nakhoda Ragam aka Sultan Bolkiah of Brunei and Putri Laila Menchanai of Sulu didn't die at sea. In reality, they lived happily ever after and ruled over their realms for almost 4 decades. In fact, 39 years. And they actually built something that lasted far longer than any legend. A bloodline that didn't just stay in Brunei. It spread out to Sulu, to Luzon, to what is now Malaysia and beyond. Sultan Bolkiah was the 5th Sultan of Brunei, reigning from 1485 to 1524, a nearly 40-year reign that is now considered the golden age of Brunei. And the nickname Nakhoda Ragam, that was real. He really was known as the singing captain, and he really did love sailing. He commanded a maritime empire that stretched across what are now Brunei, Malaysia, Indonesia, and the Philippines. And during his time, he was one of the most powerful rulers in all of Southeast Asia. But what about the princess from the legend? Putri Menchanai was not some mystical sea princess. She was royalty, but her lineage was even more impressive than the legend suggests. She was a Dayang, a princess of the highest rank in Sulu. Her grandfather was none other than Sultan Shariful Hashim, the founder of the Sulu Sultanate, and he was a known descendant of the Prophet Muhammad. So Putri Menchanai didn't just carry royal blood, she carried religious and spiritual legitimacy. When Sultan Bolkiah married Putri Menchanai, he wasn't just marrying a beautiful woman from his dreams. He was uniting Brunei with Sulu, two of Southeast Asia's oldest and most powerful sultanates joined through marriage. And according to oral traditions, they genuinely love each other. That part of the story was true. But unlike the legend, they didn't die at sea. They lived long lives. They ruled together and raised many children. And those children didn't just inherit the throne in Brunei. Their bloodline spread far and wide to what became the royal houses of Malaysia, Sulu, Luzon, and beyond. But one daughter in particular would change everything in what is now the Philippines, the graceful and fierce Dayang Ysmeria. But here's the thing, Sultan Bolkiah of Brunei and Putri Menchanai of Sulu were not the only royal couple building connections between kingdoms during this time. Hindi lang sila ang makapangyarihang mag-asawa sa bahaging ito ng mundo noong mga panahong iyon. In fact, there was another couple from the same generation building the same kind of connections from the north. So habang nangyayari lahat ng ito sa Brunei at Sulu, while all of this was happening in Brunei and Sulu, something else was happening in Luzon. There was a queen, and her name quite literally meant the embodiment of the heavens in both Kapampangan and Tagalog. And under her glorious reign, Luzon held a monopoly of trade with China, one of the most coveted and valuable trade rights in the world during this time, especially during this time. She was one of the most powerful rulers and one of the most legendary queens in what is now the Philippines. And yet, most Filipinos today have never heard of her name. They never learned about her. So sino nga ba ang makapangyarihang reynang ito at sino ang kanyang minamahal na asawa? According to oral traditions, Kalangitan was the paramount ruler of Luzon or Luzon, and that name Kalangitan was not really her birth name. It was her regnal name or regnal title in Kapampangan traditions, bestowed upon her when she ascended to become the ruler. It literally means the heavens in both Kapampangan and Tagalog. Now in Precolonial Luzon or Luzon, commoners were not even allowed to speak the given names of royalty. So her people called her Kalangitan or Dayang Kalangitan, the embodiment of the heavens, and that is how they saw her. Now here's some important context. Brunei, Sulu, and Luzon had all been once under the influence of the mighty Majapahit Empire, centered in Java or what is now Indonesia. But as that empire declined, these kingdoms broke free and rose as powers in their own right. Now according to legends and oral traditions, Kalangitan was the eldest daughter of Rajah of Tondo. And in Tondo and across Luzon or Precolonial Luzon, gender didn't determine who could rule. What mattered was your ability to lead, your ability to protect your people. And Kalangitan proved herself. Now as queen, she didn't just maintain Luzon's independence, she expanded it. And under her reign, Luzon secured something that every kingdom in the region wanted, a monopoly of trade with China. You see, the Ming dynasty had closed its doors to most of the world, but Luzon or Lusung was one of the few exceptions. So if you wanted silk, porcelain, or any of those highly sought after Chinese goods, you had to go through the Luzones. Manila Bay became one of the most important trading hubs in all of Southeast Asia. Kalangitan's reign ushered in the golden age of Luzon. Kalangitan's beloved husband was Rajah or Gatlontok, a prince from the royal house of Brunei or Sulu, or even both. We don't actually have complete records on exactly which, but either way, it means the same thing. Intermarriage between these kingdoms was already happening in multiple directions, an intricate web of kinship between Luzon, Brunei, and Sulu, long before the conquistadors came. Now according to oral traditions, Dayang Kalangitan and Rajah ruled together, Both are capable leaders, both respected and beloved by their people. And just like Sultan Bolkiah and Putri Laila Menchanai, they had many children who married into various royal houses. So let's zoom out for a moment. In the same generation, you have Sultan Bolkiah and Putri Laila Menchanai of Sulu reigning over the golden age of Brunei in the south. Now in the north, you also have Kalangitan and Rajah building the golden age of Luzon. Two power couples, two rising kingdoms connected by blood, but competing for the same prize. Rajah may have roots from Brunei, but that didn't stop what happened next. Brunei wanted what Luzon had, the lucrative monopoly of trade with China, access to Chinese goods, one of the most valuable trading routes in the world. So family ties or not, Sultan Bolkiah was not gonna let that go. And so, the Sultanate of Brunei invaded Manila Bay, but the Kingdom of Luzon fought back. Now, both sides claim they won. Both sides claim victory. But the thing is, the records don't actually agree on who was victorious, don't actually agree on who won. But what they do agree on was what happened next. Brunei under Sultan Bolkiah was rising fast, the emerging powerhouse to the south ever since the Majapahit Empire started to collapse. And Luzon under Kalangitan had become one of the most important trading tarasocracies or maritime power in all of Southeast Asia. Maybe even the entire known world, thanks to that monopoly of trade with China. And that kind of wealth and influence does not go unnoticed. And here is where it gets complicated. Like, Game of Thrones level kind of drama. Rajah, Kalangitan's beloved husband, was said to be a prince from Brunei, possibly a brother, a cousin, or maybe even an uncle of Sultan Bolkiah himself. The exact details of how they're related are murky, but family ties did not stop what happened next. According to Brunei's own records, Sultan Bolkiah personally led an invasion of Manila Bay in the late 1400s, an attempt to take over Luzon's monopoly of trade with China. The results of this epic battle remains unclear, as both sides claim victory in their own respective accounts. Oral traditions in Luzon say that they repelled the invasion, while in Brunei, they said that they achieved their objectives. Now most likely, it was a stalemate. Neither side was able to destroy the other. When two rival powerful kingdoms cannot destroy each other, they have two choices: keep bleeding or make peace. And in pre-colonial Southeast Asia, peace was not signed on paper. Peace was sealed through marriage and children. And that brings us to the wedding, the marriage that bridged everything. Isang kasalan na nagdala ng kapayapaan sa dalawang dating magkaaway, nag-ugnay sa dalawang dating magkaribal. And this is where Dayang Ysmeria comes in. Dayang Ysmeria was a princess who basically connected everything. So let's think about her lineage for a moment. Silipin muna natin ang kanyang pinagmulan, ang kanyang mga ninuno. Dayang Ysmeria's father, Sultan Bolkiah, was the most powerful sultan in the history of Brunei, while her mother, Putri Laila Menchanai, was the granddaughter of the founder of the Sultanate of Sulu, who himself was a descendant of the Prophet Muhammad. So think about it. Dayang Ysmeria carried the bloodlines of the two of the oldest sultanates in the history of Southeast Asia. And then she married into Luzon, into the family of the queen who embodied the heavens. And so the two powers made peace through marriage. Dayang Ysmeria, the beloved daughter of Sultan Bolkiah and Putri Laila Menchanai, would marry Rajah Salalila, the eldest son of Kalangitan and Rajah. So the families that went to war would now be united through their children. Dayang Ysmeria's name traces back to Ysmeria, a flower native to North Africa. In Arabic traditions, it means flower in paradise. And that is exactly what she was, a princess who carried the blood of two sultanates. Now her husband, Rajah Salalila, was the heir and future king of Luzon. But the thing is, this was not just a political arrangement to end the war or to end the conflict between Brunei and Luzon. According to Kapampangan oral traditions, their marriage was a genuine love match. In fact, Rajah Salalila described Dayang Ysmeria as his beloved beautiful queen, with brilliant skin, luscious hair, tall and elegant, graceful, like the swaying of the palm tree in the breeze. Together they built something that would last for centuries, the fortified walled city of Maynila, a fortress of adobe bricks, rammed earth, volcanic stones with ramparts mounted with bronze cannons, a strategic stronghold protecting the thriving and sought-after international trade in Manila Bay, the pre-colonial city that would become today's Manila. But tragedy did strike. Rajah Salalila died in the early 1500s. Dayang Ysmeria was now a young widow, her son and heir, Rajah Aceh, was still young, and the rivals within the royal family of Luzon saw an opportunity and they took it. Cousins turned on each other. And if you've seen Game of Thrones or House of the Dragon, then you have an idea how this goes. But Dayang Ysmeria didn't crumble. She became the queen regent and ruled Manila. She chose diplomacy over bloodshed, even as tensions simmered within the royal houses. She held the realm together through her sheer wisdom. Despite the death of her beloved husband, she raised her sons to become the rulers who would one day face the Spaniards. Rajah Aceh would later be known as Rajah Matanda, and along with his younger brother Lakandula and their nephew Rajah Sulaiman, they were the paramount rulers of Luzon the conquistadors encountered in 1570. By the 1500s, the royal families of Brunei, Sulu, and Luzon were basically all one big family, connected by multiple marriages across multiple generations, an intricate web of kinship spanning 3 sovereign kingdoms. But it didn't stop there. So if you remember Queen Victoria and Prince Albert of the United Kingdom, their grandchildren ended up on the thrones of Britain, Germany, Russia, Spain. Half of Europe was ruled by the descendants, the grandchildren of one couple. Kaya naman magpahanggang sa ngayon ay magkakamag-anak ang mga royal families sa Europa. Now, the same thing practically happened across our islands in maritime Southeast Asia. But the thing is, it wasn't just one couple. So, hindi lang isang mag-asawa. Nandyan si Sultan Bolkiah at si Putri Menchanai, si Dayang Kalangitan at si Rajah Lontok, si Dayang Ysmeria at si Rajah Salalila. And their descendants didn't just inherit the thrones of their parents. They ended up ruling across Southeast Asia, in what are now Brunei, the Philippines, Malaysia, Indonesia, and beyond. So let's trace how this web spread across the region, across the many islands of Southeast Asia. First, we have Kalangitan's eldest daughter, Panginwan. In Kapampangan, Panginwan means the one who was revered with divinity, and she married Prince Balagtas, a prince who came all the way from Java, in what is now Indonesia. Now here's where it gets even more interesting. His mother was a Luzon princess named Sasanban. In Kapampangan, Sasanban or Sasamban literally means the one who is worshipped, and she married Emperor Angavijaya, who was said to be the last ruler of the Majapahit. So in short, Prince Balagtas was half Kapampangan, half Majapahit royalty, and when he returned to Luzon and married Panginwan, the ties between Luzon and Java continued, even as the mighty Majapahit Empire collapsed. But the thing is, the descendants of Panginwan and Balagtas would later clash with their own cousins, with those of Dayang Ysmeria and Rajah Salalila. So these are cousins going to war with each other, fighting for the same throne, fighting for who would rule Luzon. But that is a story deserving of its own video, so stay tuned. But for now, back in Brunei, Sultan Bolkiah and Putri Menchanai's children continued the royal line. But unlike so many other kingdoms, that line never broke. Today, Sultan Hassan al-Bolkiah reigns as the 29th Sultan, and he is in fact the longest reigning living monarch in the world. The royal wedding of his beloved son, Prince Abdulmatin, made headlines worldwide, a 10-day celebration with over 5,000 guests, including world leaders from around the globe. The House of Bolkiah has ruled Brunei for over 500 years, all tracing back to the singing captain and his beloved princess from Sulu. Now in Malaysia, their descendants ruled the Sultanate of Pahang. They founded the Sultanate of Sarawak, and over the centuries, the bloodline of Sultan Bolkiah and Putri Menchanai continued across what is now modern-day Malaysia. Through the centuries, the Royal House of Brunei built stronger ties with other Malay sultanates through marriage and alliances. Now in Sulu, their bloodline continued through more than 30 sultans, an unbroken line, all documented in the Tarsilas, the indigenous traditional genealogical records that the people of Sulu guarded for centuries. In fact, the royal families of Sulu today are still the descendants of Putri Menchanai and Sultan Bolkiah, and from Sulu, the ties extended to Maguindanao. And perhaps the most famous example of this is the legendary Sultan who defeated the Spaniards in their attempt to colonize his homeland. The legendary Sultan who defended the freedom of Mindanao, none other than Sultan Kudarat. He married the great-granddaughter of Sultan Bolkiah and Putri Menchanai. But the thing is, he was also their descendant himself. his own mother was a princess from Sulu, a cousin of Rajah Matanda, the king of Luzon, and of Lakandula of Tondo. Now these intermarriages also reached the Moluccas. Unknown to many, the royal families of the fabled Spice Islands were also part of this intricate web. So from Luzon to Java, from Malacca to the Moluccas, they were all deeply connected to each other, more than most people today even realize. And the thing is, all of these are just one thread in this interwoven history. I mean, I haven't even talked about the royal houses of Cebu and Butuan and so many others. Now, when people hear these connections, they usually have a lot of questions. Halimbawa, for example, when people hear about Rajah Matanda, the king of Luzon, serving as the admiral to his grandfather, Sultan Bolkiah of Brunei, maraming natanong. Many people ask me, does this mean that the Philippines was once a colony of Brunei? Now, this is a question that I get a lot. But the answer is quite complicated. And that is a whole story that I want to talk about in a future video. But for now, let's talk about what happened next. What happened when this intricate web of kinship met the Spaniards. So first, let's review Philippine history. Review muna tayo. Ferdinand Magellan discovered the Philippines in 1521. Allegedly. Now, 50 years after that, the conquistadors arrived in Manila Bay in 1570. And they conquered Manila in 1571. And from there, they spread out to colonize our islands, and they tried their best to erase what came before them. But the thing is, the royal bloodlines of these families did not just disappear. They did not fade into oblivion. They survived. They adapted and survived. In 1521, a young prince named Rajah encountered the survivors of Magellan's expedition. 49 years later, when the conquistadors arrived in Manila, that same prince ruled as Rajah Matanda, the king of Lusong or Luzon, with his younger brother Lakandula as the Lakan of Tondo, and their nephew, Rajah Sulaiman of Maynila, as the Rajah Muda or the crown prince of Lusong. These were the sons and grandson of Dayang Ysmeria and Rajah Salalila. They were the paramount rulers of the islands who faced off the colonizers in the late 1500s. But here's the thing, even under colonial rule, the connections didn't stop, it didn't end. Dayang Ysmeria's great-grandchildren, like Agustin de Legazpi, still married into Brunei's royal family, and that web of kinship became a weapon. In fact, from 1587 to 1588, Lakandula's son, Magat Salamat, and his cousin, Agustin de Legazpi, led the Revolt of the Lakans, a conspiracy to liberate our islands from Spanish rule, an uprising involving their cousins in Brunei and Sulu, along with their allies from Japan. But this conspiracy, this revolt, was uncovered, and their leaders, the Lakans of Tondo and Maynila, were gruesomely executed. But they were not the first nor the last. Unknown to many, from the Candaba Revolt of 1585 to the Filipino Revolution of 1896, the descendants of these lineages fought against colonial abuse. And to this day, many continue to fight for workers' rights, for land reform, for justice. Now, throughout the centuries, the colonial government meticulously tracked down who was who, because lineage came with both privileges and risk. Now yes, many descendants received tax exemptions and other privileges, but being descended from the Lakans of Luzon also meant being constantly watched, being seen as a threat. Some families hid their roots, others even had their records destroyed. And the ones who kept track did so carefully, quietly. Oral traditions, cross-reference with church records, colonial documents, and even genealogies carved into the doors of ancestral homes. That is how the Mapyang Sugi, the descendants of Lakandula, Rajah Matanda, and Rajah Sulaiman survived. My own roots trace back to these lineages, and through the centuries, even long after the fall of their kingdoms, these bloodlines produced scholars, artists, lawyers, religious leaders, and yes, even activists and revolutionaries. They also produced politicians like former Philippine presidents Diosdado Macapagal and Gloria Macapagal Arroyo, fierce senators like Jovito Salonga and Gil Puyat, and even world-class artists like the famous Disney princess Lea Salonga, and so many more. The bloodlines did not disappear. We are still here. In Brunei, they still sing about Sultan Bolkiah and Putri Menchanai. In fact, thousands of people still visit their gravesite to pay respect every year. Now in Sulu, the genealogies are still recited and memorized by heart. While in mainstream Philippines, most people have largely forgotten. Most people have never heard of these names. Now Brunei remembers, Sulu remembers, Maguindanao remembers, and somehow most Filipinos today have forgotten. At may dahilan kung bakit natin nakalimutan. The Spaniards had every reason to make us forget. erase the connections, erase the history, and you erase the evidence that these islands, our islands, were not savages. They were not uncivilized. That our islands were part of something larger, a sophisticated civilization. Now, I'm not saying that these kingdoms were flawless. They were not. They had rivalries, internal conflicts, power struggles, and even class struggles, just like any other civilization. And that is exactly the point. They were not myth or fairy tales. They were functioning political societies, sovereign, powerful, and deeply connected to the rest of Southeast Asia, deeply connected to us today. In Brunei, they still sing about the eternal love of Sultan Bolkiah and Putri Menchanai. In fact, to this day, 5 centuries later, thousands of people still flock to their makam, to their royal tomb and shrine, to pay their respects to Sultan Bolkiah and Putri Menchanai. The memory is alive and thriving in Brunei. Now in Sulu, the families preserve these connections through the Tarsilas, passed down for centuries through songs, chants, and text, written on goat skin and engraved on brass gongs. In fact, the word itself comes from Arabic, meaning chain or link. These family trees were recited at weddings to bind 2 lineages together. Now sadly, many were lost during the Japanese occupation during World War II, but this indigenous tradition survived. In fact, Muslim families in Sulu today can still trace their ancestry back to the 1400s because of the Tarsilas. Now across the Philippines, in our schools and around the world, we learn about Magellan. We learn about the so-called discovery of our islands. We were taught that these islands were primitive savages waiting to be civilized. But the connections that tied these islands to the rest of Southeast Asia, the evidence that our people, our ancestors, were once one with our neighbors, that is the part we lost. And it doesn't help that World War II burned the archives in Manila to the ground. The Tarsilas in Sulu and the Silsilas in Brunei survived because they were not just documents in a building. They were not limited to papers. They were sung, chanted, and passed down through the families. But in Luzon, so much was destroyed. What we have left are the oral traditions, the church records, the colonial documents, and whatever fragments our families managed to save. Unlike Romeo and Juliet, these were not tragedies. These were epic love stories and bloodlines that survived centuries of colonialism. Brunei remembers. Sulu remembers. Maybe it's time that the rest of us did too. Our ancestors understood something deeper. In Tagalog, ang hindi marunong lumingon sa pinanggalingan ay hindi makakarating sa paroroonan. Those who do not know how to look back from where they came from cannot reach their destination. And in Kapampangan, kabang lalalam ka pangakilala king yambut mo, alalasan me ing mayumong bunga ning pun mo. The deeper you know your roots, the deeper you understand where you came from, the sweeter you taste the fruits of your tree. And that is why I do what I do. Why I write my books and make videos like this. Speaking of which, I'm currently working on a new book, Forgotten Kingdoms of the Sea, demystifying the islands we now call the Philippines. And I'm actually doing this in collaboration with Bayani Art, Bayani Books. And we will be launching the Kickstarter soon. So keep an eye out for that and follow me on social media to learn more how to support. But for now, let me know what other forgotten chapters of our history that you want to see covered in the new book or you want to see in my future videos. Let me know in the comments below. Maraming salamat po o in Kapampangan dakal pong salamat kay Hongan and in Bahasa Sug magsukol tuod kay mo. See you next time on Tagalog Kita Kits and in Kapampangan, Mikitix and in Bahasa Malayo, Jum palagi.